What on earth is wrong with Thomas? You'd expect a different reaction when your best disciple friends leap in with the greatest news ever. Thomas, we've seen the Lord. But Thomas can't share their joy. He will not. He's always been one of the more intense disciples. He makes two other notable appearances in the Gospel of John. In the first one, he exhorts his disciple friends to follow Jesus back to Judea of Bethany, where they had just been in danger. Jesus' friend Lazarus is sick. And when Jesus urges them to go back, Thomas says, "Let us all go back so we can die with him." It's hard to read in his tone whether he's being devout or whether he's dripping with sarcasm, but Thomas is that friend who says what everybody might be thinking, they just know not to say it. Later on, Jesus is trying to explain that he has to leave his friends. And in chapter 14, he's trying to describe to them what's going to happen. And he says, "Where I'm going, there are many dwelling places, and I go to prepare a place for you, so that where you might go, there I will be also." And it's this beautiful moment. And what does Thomas do? But he comes charging in like a bull in a china shop and says, "Lord, I don't know where you're going." That's Thomas. The guy who will say anything precisely at the wrong time. But he's also a disciple who is honest. He is as real about his grief and his anger as he can be. He honors his own questions, not by swallowing them down and waiting for them to answer themselves in private, but he puts them all out there, even if it makes us squirm a little bit. And who of us wouldn't need a bit more convincing if we had just seen our best friend and teacher violently killed, and then a week later friends say, "Hey, we saw him, you just missed him." All Thomas is really asking for is his own share of the miracle that his friends had a week before. And it was an amazing day. Jesus finds his way behind locked doors, shows them his hands and his side, and breathes his peace upon them. Thomas knows that he needs to see that too, and his honesty invites our own. I kind of think Thomas is a hero for any of us on a day when we find it almost impossible to believe in God. Maybe there's been a time, a day, an hour when you felt traumatized by your own life. Perhaps the death of a loved one made you feel so exhausted, so overwhelmed, so angry that it would take nothing short of a miracle to ever see beyond it. Well, whenever you find yourself on such thin ice again, remember your socially awkward friend Thomas. He's a disciple who gives us all permission to feel what we're feeling and invite God to show up and fix it. Speaking of showing up, the Bible in Greek has 3 different verbs for seeing. The first one is blepo. I blepo this cute little crane. I see it. A step beyond that is a verb called orao. I orao you. I regard you. I consider you. I may not know everything about you, but I'm interested. I'm wondering about you. But there's a third way of seeing, and it's the verb eidon. To Eidon means that you see it and you get it. And not only that, but what you are seeing sees you back, and it changes everything. As you can imagine, that verb Eidon, that deep and transformative way of seeing, it doesn't show up much in the Gospel of John. And yet, it's there. Every time Jesus or one of his disciples or the woman at the well says, "Come and see," really what they're saying is, come and Eidon, come and be seen, come and have your life changed by what's about to show up. Now, when the disciples see Thomas and they say, "We have seen the Lord," you would expect that they would say, "We have Eidoned, we have seen," but they're not that strong. The disciples say to Thomas in verse 25, "We have oraoed, we've seen the Lord." And I can't blame them if maybe they're still trying to understand what it is they've been given to see. After all, this is the Easter miracle coming true in their sight. It might take us a moment to really make sense of it. But Thomas, when he fires back in the same verse, he ups the ante. And when he says, "Unless I see the mark in his hands and the wound side," he doesn't want to just orao. He wants to Eidon. He wants to see and touch. He needs to be sure. And we're here this morning, the week after Easter, because that's exactly what happened. To me, the miracle of an Easter faith is that while the doors are locked shut against the world, Jesus makes it possible for us to see anew. And not only that, but Jesus sees us. As brave as Thomas is that day, in a way, he's having trouble living beyond locked doors. Just like those disciple friends who still fear a world that seems waiting for them to be difficult and violent and lonely, what Thomas insists upon seeing, what he says he has to Eidon, is a familiar picture of Jesus from last week. A tortured, hurt, dead friend. But the gift of an Easter faith is not that he or any disciple friend gets to see that Jesus again, but that our crucified and risen Lord, that Christ comes from the other side of the grave to come and see us. Jesus returns again to where his disciple friends are hiding out, and he narrates back for Thomas precisely what he had just said he needed to see. He invites Thomas to see, you guessed it, to Eidon his hands, to see that they are not periods in a closed sentence. And in doing so, Jesus' way of seeing him and the rest of those disciples is to behold them, to love them, to help them to see him and themselves in a way that changes everything. And then, as if that weren't enough, if being seen and seeing the risen Lord wasn't great, he turns and he almost is speaking to us in that final verse when he says, "Blessed are those who have not yet seen and have come to believe." Here, Jesus invites disciples of every age into our own Easter faith that transcends what we can or cannot see with our own eyes. It includes those who have seen clearly and those who haven't seen yet. Imagine with me a wide gathering of contentious disciples. All of us are fearful. All of us seem intent upon not agreeing on anything. And all of us crammed together in that lonely room, that is precisely the place where the risen Lord likes to show up and greet us again. And in this story, especially that final verse, it seems to suggest that one of two things might happen to us. Thing one, we might get to see what Thomas saw. We might get to see, to idone, the precise miracle the way we need it on that day. But the second thing might be just as good. The other thing Jesus says is, blessed are those who don't get to see that. You too are included in this story. You too are part of this Easter faith. And you too are going to find a way into my story, whether you believe it now or not. I think our share of this story this morning is that we are the ones truly beheld, truly seen by Jesus. And our faith, howsoever it finds us and whenever it finds us, helps us to see things differently. I used to be a competitive runner. I wasn't very good, but I was fierce and mediocre about it. I trained hard. And when my inauspicious career ended, I didn't quite know what to do with what had been a passion in my life. And so, sort of like our awkward disciple friend Thomas, I said, look it, unless I can run this particular way at this particular time, I'm not going to run at all. And so that was how my life went. But slowly, in my advancing age, even when I can't totally see where my running is going, I'm slowly starting to find that maybe the gift this whole time was that running would embrace this wider, gentler part of my life, that it could begin to lead me to places not as quick as I could get there, but just become part of a fuller life, to give me some time to be reflective, to be thankful, to ponder this story, and to find myself happier, better for it, even if I was slower. A lot slower. It's a tiny daily example. But I'm convinced that God is asking me, teaching me to see things differently. May it be so for all of us this Easter. Because an Easter faith helps us to see things differently. It wants to find us at precisely the moment we think it never will. Like the song we sang earlier, we get to go through our lives not afraid of locked doors, and to see with the eyes of our heart what may have been waiting for us all along. Thanks be to God.